As frontier models hit web scale, researchers realized there was effectively no more human-written text left to harvest, so they tried a tempting shortcut: let the models feed on AI-generated content. Problem solved. It seemed like a fix: cheap, limitless synthetic data. Early gains looked effortless, but the diet became data cannibalism. The loop tightened, voices blurred into echoes, and the stream narrowed. Probing the feedback, researchers unveiled a new phenomenon: model collapse, the point at which an AI ecosystem trains on its own output. In this section, we tell that story and show how nDNA helps spot the slide before it takes over. Let's look at two examples to see what model collapse looks like, one in text-to-image and one in LLM. Here's what you are seeing in the clip: a visual case of model collapse in a text-to-image loop. An image is generated, then the model, or a successor trained on those generations, makes another image from that image's caption style, and so on. Each round feeds the model more of its own outputs instead of fresh, human data. Visible symptoms as the loop tightens: detail loss, skin pores, stray hairs, microshadows, and background texture disappear. The face turns smooth and waxy. Convergence to a stereotype: the identity drifts toward the model's dominant, average face, symmetrical features, perfect lighting, same grin. Diversity vanishes, rare traits are forgotten. Palette and contrast shrink, colors flatten, highlights bloom, and the scene looks uniformly studio nice. Over-regularization: features get overly neat and aligned. The model's priors overwhelm real-world variability. Here's model collapse in text. The same prompt is passed through a line of small language models, where each new model is trained on the previous model's outputs. At Gen 0, the answer is still anchored to the topic: perpendicular revival architecture. By Gen 1, the grip loosens. The model reaches for safe, famous examples: St. Peter's Basilica, already drifting from the prompt. By Gen 5, the response has slid into boilerplate and frequency bias, lists of languages and stock phrases that have nothing to do with the question. By Gen 9, the text breaks down into artifacts and nonsense, at-tailed jackrabbits, a telltale sign that the system is now amplifying its own token quirks rather than meaning. What's happening underneath is a feedback loop. Training on model-made text amplifies common patterns and erases rare signals. Specific facts decay, generic templates take over, and tokenizer detritus leaks into the output. We propose a second route to model collapse: recursive self-merging. Concretely, parent 1 plus child 1 child 2, then child 1 plus child to child 3, and so on. We'll measure how collapse evolves under this chain, using nDNA to track when diversity shrinks, routes converge, and stability breaks. Recursive self-merging is our AI analog of biological inbreeding. In biology, inbreeding shrinks genetic diversity and lets quirks harden into defects, resilience falls. We ask a similar question for models: if a parent is repeatedly merged with its own descendants without fresh human-crafted data or new priors, does the model's semantic gene narrow and drift toward collapse? Our hypothesis: recursive self-merging behaves like algorithmic inbreeding. Representations lose variety, rare skills fade, spurious habits amplify, and the internal flow flattens. In nDNA terms, we expect gentler bends, shorter effective effort. On the surface, outputs converge, diversity falls, calibration drifts, and brittleness under distribution shift grows. We'll test this by chaining merges: parent 1 with child 1 to make child 2, then merge child 1 with child 2 to make child 3, and so on, and auditing each generation with nDNA and external checks, output diversity. The goal is to study AI inbreeding systematically. If you are not sure what is inbreeding, please watch this short documentary to understand. Feel free to skip if you are familiar with this concept.
Smurfs or the Na'vi from Avatar, but the Fugates from Kentucky. Since 1820, the family lived in isolation for over a century and only married within their own ranks.
You made out with your sister, man! Shut up!
But where did their blue look come from?
I'm blue.
According to research, it was the result of a recessive mutation in the CYB5R gene. This mutation leads to a blood disorder known as methemoglobinemia, which tints the skin blue, especially in the lips and fingers. Years of inbreeding increased the odds of the blue look. By the 1960s, their ancestors started to resent it. Luckily, a hematologist came to the rescue. He gave them pills containing methylene blue dye, which counteracted their condition. Within minutes, the blueness faded away. So much for auditioning for the Blue Man Group. This is just one of the many medical outcomes of inbreeding. If you've got the hots for your cousin or your aunt, you may want to pay attention to this video before you take any chances. This is Your Body On 8 Reasons Why You Shouldn't Inbreed. Number 7. The Habsburg Jaw. In 13th century Germany, the royal Habsburg family took power. Their rule extended to many European kingdoms, but they are most famous for their monarchy in Spain, for various jaw-dropping reasons. They were a close-knit family, to say the least, and they did not want any outside interference to threaten their power. Throughout their Spanish reign from 1516 to 1700 CE, only 2 out of 11 marriages weren't incestuous.
So that's how it is in their family.
As their lineage grew, so too did their jaws, and not in the flattering Zac Efron way.
Yeah.
This particular genetic feature, known as mandibular prognathism, leads to symptoms like a protruding jawline, misalignment of teeth, and difficulty breathing, swallowing, and talking. It's a condition that affects only 2 to 4% of adults around the world, but for the Habsburgs, it was much more common. The most famous Habsburg by far was King Charles II. He was the product of 16 generations of family inbreeding, and, well, it showed.
What?
Poor young Charles didn't speak until he was 4 years old due to his deformed jaw. He was short, weak, and impotent. To make matters worse, he had constant stomach problems and suffered from epilepsy and developmental delays. He produced no heirs and died when he was only 38. Autopsies reveal that his lungs were corroded, his intestines were rotten, and his head was full of water. But he's not the only royal to suffer from a horny family.
Horny. Yeah. Crazy horny.
King Tut's disease. When his golden tomb was discovered in 1922, the legendary pharaoh King Tutankhamun became a worldwide phenomenon. Despite all the grandeur, his reign and life in Egypt were short. Tut ascended the throne at only 9 years old, but passed away at the age of 18 with no heirs to his name. His death puzzled scientists for decades, with theories ranging from a chariot crash to murder. But years later, molecular genetic analysis and thousands of CT scans revealed a different story. While most accounts regaled him as a handsome young pharaoh, in truth, he was a physically deformed teen who had to walk with a cane. With Tut's parents keeping it all in the family, scientists believe his ancestral lineage was the cause of his predicaments. He had a clubbed foot from Kohler's disease, a rare genetic disorder that leads to foot bone necrosis. He also had fused neck vertebrae due to Klippel-Feil syndrome, and a raging malaria infection to top it all off. If your family tree resembles a pyramid like Tut's did, your odds of hereditary conditions increases with every generation, even diabetes. Number 5. Neonatal diabetes. One of the most fatal consequences of generational inbreeding is Walcott-Rollison syndrome, or WRS, an incredibly rare genetic form of diabetes. While type 1 diabetes affects about 8.4 million people around the globe, WRS has been reported in only 100 children to date. It arises due to mutations in the EIF2AK3 gene, which can affect your body's cells and their ability to respond to stress. As a result, several symptoms can occur, including permanent diabetes, abnormal bone development, liver failure, and developmental delays, to name a few. 25% of all cases of WRS have come from children of consanguineous marriages. That's a fancy term for sharing the same ancestor. Number 4. Huntington's disease. Huntington's disease is an extremely rare condition affecting about 3 out of 100,000 people worldwide. The debilitating disease causes your nerve cells to break down over time, making you slowly lose function over your body. This terrible affliction strikes people in their 30s and 40s and features a range of symptoms, from twitching and trouble swallowing to poor memory recall and impulse control. It also has a high likelihood of obsessive-compulsive disorder, depression, and bipolar disorder. Sadly, life expectancy is between 10 to 30 years. Many isolated communities in fishing villages near Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela have been affected by Huntington's. It is believed that over 200 years ago, one woman who carried the mutation settled in the village and gave birth to 10 children. After 2 centuries of interbreeding, now 1 out of every 10 people in the area have the disease. Number 3. Hemophilia. Queen Victoria was known as the grandmother of modern Europe, and for good reason. 9 of her children and 42 of her grandchildren married into royal families across Europe, spreading their rule over Germany, Russia, and Spain. While Queen Vic's descendants were taking powerful positions across European empires, the British monarch passed along an unknowing gift to her progeny: hemophilia B. People with hemophilia B bleed longer than usual and are more prone to bruising and internal bleeding. The Queen's son, Prince Leopold, the Duke of Albany, passed away from a brain hemorrhage after taking a spill. Her young grandson also died from internal bleeding after falling out of a window, and several other descendants suffered similar blood-related fates. Number 2. Angelman syndrome. Unfortunately, despite the name, there is nothing angelic about this syndrome. Angelman syndrome is a rare genetic disorder that affects the nervous system. It's a result of the mutation of the gene UBE3A. We inherit 2 copies of the UBE3A gene, one from each parent. Both copies are active throughout our body's tissues, but the brain only uses the mother's copy. If this copy gets deleted by a mutation, the protein can lead to a host of problems. These can include intellectual disabilities, trouble sleeping, seizures, and more. For some, it can result in a small skull and abnormal curving of the spine. But the most bizarre symptom of all is constant laughing and a happy personality. While it's rare, the chances increase if you're keeping it in the family. Number 1. Ostrich people. In the northern Kayemba region of Zimbabwe, Africa, resides the Vedoma tribe. Their elders claim they hail from the baobab tree, and various origin stories passed down through generations describe their paternal ancestors as having a bird-like appearance. Whether or not the stories are true, you would think they hold weight just by looking at the tribe members' hands and feet. Many of the Vedoma people have fingers and toes that look more bird-like than human, earning them their ostrich people nickname. This is due to a disorder called ectrodactyly, or split hand-foot malformation. It causes the toes and fingers to fuse together with a space in the middle, much like a bird's foot. SHFM is quite rare. Only around 1 in 90,000 people are at risk of the disorder. But in the case of the Vedoma tribe, the prevalence is much higher. Their laws prohibit marrying outsiders from other tribes. As a result, about 1 out of 4 Vedoma children are born with fused toes or fingers. Throughout history, inbreeding was used as a means of keeping bloodlines strong, but in many cases, it had the opposite effect, especially over several generations of incestual hanky-panky. But despite the risks, marrying within the family is still a common practice in some areas of the Middle East, South Asia, and Africa. In Pakistan alone, 65% of marriages are between cousins. This is done to strengthen family ties, maintain caste and status among partners, and even keep familiarity between in-laws.
In this section, we report what nDNA shows as models march through generations. Across runs, we see a steady, semantic flattening. The path through the upper layers bends less, the cumulative effort to reach an answer shrinks, and the internal push begins to point in one dominant direction. Distinct latent features that once separated skills and styles blur together, an early sign of structural collapse rather than a sudden cliff. Importantly, the generation at which these markers cross our alert thresholds is not universal. Cultural lineages differ. Some, often with thinner or less varied priors, show earlier flattening and faster homogenization. Others retain curvature and effort for more rounds before drifting. We simulate autoregressive degeneration by fine-tuning llama on alpaca, then using each generation's own outputs to create the next training set. The nDNA plot on the right tracks layer depth on the x-axis, spectral curvature kappa on the y-axis, and thermodynamic length L on the z-axis. The gray curve is the base model. Colored curves are generations 110. What to notice? Early drop, then flattening. By Gen 1 and Gen 2, the mid-late layers already lose thermodynamic length, shorter reasoning path, and curvature kappa, less turning. Later generations collapse toward a shallow, almost flat manifold. Shrinking alignment force, the belief vector magnitudes, not shown here, fall in lockstep, steering toward concepts becomes weaker with each round. Plateau of brittleness, by Gen 8 to Gen 10, curves cluster near low L and low kappa. Answers may still come, but with little internal work or flexibility. Why this happens? Intuition. Self-copying narrows diversity. Training only on a model's own phrasing removes rare modes and edge cases, so internal routes disappear. Loss of corrective signal. Without fresh, human-grounded targets, errors and safe clichés are amplified. The manifold straightens and shortens. Instruction overfitting. The stack learns to satisfy format and style with minimal computation. Good for fluency, bad for adaptable reasoning. Practical guardrails. Mix every generation with gold data or human edits. Cap the synthetic fraction. Rotate or refresh the teacher rather than chaining a single student. Add geometry-preserving regularizers. Keep late layer kappa and Amitava floor. Penalize collapse of belief vector strength. Use multi-teacher, multi-style prompts and diversity filters. Stop when nDNA shows sustained declines. Bottom line, repeated self-fine-tuning turns rich reasoning paths into short, straight shortcuts. nDNA makes the collapse visible, curvature and effort drain away generation by generation. Let us try to get the intuition. What exactly happened when model collapsed through the lens of belief vector field? On the left, you are looking at a healthy belief field. Word vectors don't all point the same way, and they don't have the same strength. As you move up the layers, the directions and lengths keep changing. That spread means the model can weigh alternatives, shift strategies, change meaning, craft different ways to answer and recruit different circuits. When the question changes, its internal steering force is both varied and strong across layers. On the right is a collapsed belief field. The word vectors shrink, line up, and collect into a few thin columns. Cross-traffic fades. Depth and variety drain away. This is semantic monoculture. The model's internal steering loses power and diversity, so many different prompts are treated as if they were the same. It's the geometric signature of collapse. Vectors that once explored distinct meanings now converge towards zero. Why this matters? The belief field is a geometric analog of brain maps or genotype to phenotype landscapes. When it flattens, it signals a terminal decline in plasticity long before you see output diversity drop. When those vectors lose direction and strength, the model's capacity to differentiate concepts and adapt begins to fail long before output scores visibly drop. That flattening parallels what biology sees in atrophy and in breeding. Loss of diversity reduces adaptability. Geometric interpretation of collapse. Under the Neural Genomics lens, a model's inner life is a layered path, its nDNA trajectory, summarized at each layer by 3 numbers. Curvature, how much the route bends when the model commits to an answer. Thermodynamic length, how much work the model does as it moves through layers. Belief field strength, how hard the local steering force pushes the answer in a given direction. Healthy systems show rich variation in all 3, different bends, different effort, and differently oriented pushes across layers and prompts. Collapse is the geometric failure mode where this manifold flattens, curvature settles to a near constant, the path length shrinks toward a minimum, and the belief field becomes uniform. In practice, that means less bend, less work, and homogenized steering. The model loses exploratory capacity and drifts into semantic monoculture, even if surface outputs still look tidy. Now let's see what repeated self-merging does to cultural nDNAs, how the semantic fluid flow flattens, and with it, meaning. Across cultures, we observe 3 regimes. 1. Resilient. A small set resists collapse. Across generations, their trajectories keep a noticeable bend in the upper layers. The cumulative effort stays healthy, and the belief field remains varied. Drift happens, but slowly, exploration capacity is largely preserved. The resilient cultures look like populations with high heterozygosity and steady gene flow. Diversity buffers shocks, exploratory traits stay available, and the system keeps adapting, much like wild populations that retain variation and avoid inbreeding depression. 2. Moderate. A middle group shows gradual narrowing. Each new merge trims a bit more curvature near the top, shortens the path, and weakens the local steering force. The belief vectors start to align, and diversity fades layer by layer. Collapse arrives, but later. The moderate group resembles a bottleneck population. Each self-merge is a small founder event, diversity drains away through drift, and adaptive range narrows generation by generation. 3. Fragile. The last group flattens fast. Within a few generations, top layer bends collapse, total effort contracts, and belief vectors line up into thin columns, semantic monoculture. Exploration dies early, and outputs converge toward a single style. The fragile group is the biological analog of inbreeding plus monoculture. Lines converge quickly, rare variants are lost, and the system slides toward a Muller's ratchet-style accumulation of weaknesses, fast to uniformity, slow to recover. Here you see resilient cultures, Africa, Australia, North America. These traces show models that withstand many self-merging cycles, about 15 to 16 generations, before hitting collapse. The upper layer bend stays visible for a long stretch, total effort falls only slowly, and the belief field keeps variety instead of snapping into a single direction. You do see gentle tightening at the end of each run, but the route remains recognizable and adaptable. What it means in practice, for these cultures you have more runway. You can run several merges before human-written data mixing as refresh is needed, provided you watch the 3 nDNA gauges, top layer bend, total path length, and belief field strength. When they start to sag together, it's time to inject held-out human data or mix in a diverse teacher, preventing the late-stage slide into flattening. Which culture southern more AK resist more also an important aspect to study. We will discuss more when about translation of this strain to others in the model merging section. Here's the moderate band, Europe, Latin America, and Asia. Each begins with a healthy bend and steady internal effort in the upper layers, but with every self-merge the route narrows, the bend softens, the path shortens, and the local steering force weakens. In practice, that means fewer distinct latent moves are available as depth increases, so the belief field starts to line up rather than crossweave. Collapse arrives on a slower clock than the fragile group, but it does arrive, Europe and Latin America around the 13th generation, Asia earlier, near the 11th. In practice, these are the cultures where periodic outcrossing helps most. Add small human held-out refreshes, diversify teachers, and mix languages early to keep the route bending rather than locking into one track. Fragile group, Middle East and China. These two lineages fold fast. After only a handful of self-merges, the upper layer bend collapses, the total effort the model spends shrinks, and the belief vectors start pointing the same way. By about the 9th generation, the traces lie low and tight, exploration capacity is gone, and responses converge toward a single style. In practice, this looks like early locking, brief wobble in mid-layers, then a quick slide into a narrow, column-like flow with little cross-traffic. In practice for these cultures, keep the merge chain short and monitor 3 early warning signs: falling top layer bend, shorter path length, and weaker belief field strength. Refresh with small amounts of human or held-out data between merges, mix teachers, and anchor with culture-aware safety tuning, example, litmus-style objectives, to slow the slide. Conclusion: reading model health through nDNA. A foundation model looks less like a static program and more like a digital semantic organism. Its internal spaces can grow, adapt, and, under stress, atrophy. That shift in mindset lets us talk about model health in geometric terms, not just leaderboard scores. 3 signals tell the story. Curvature, how sharply the latent route bends when the model commits to an answer. Thermodynamic length, the cumulative work the model does across layers to reach that answer. Belief field strength, the magnitude of the local steering force that shapes the answer. When these 3 trend downward, shallower bends, shorter paths, weaker push, the model's exploratory capacity is fading. That is the early, measurable phase of collapse. What this enables, in practice, geometric diagnostics as early warnings. Track the trio above per layer and over time. Falling curvature, shrinking path length, and a weakening belief field give advance notice of latent drift long before output quality obviously declines. Manifold preserving interventions. Use training choices that protect internal diversity, spectral regularization, geodesic or path length constraints, modular heads, diverse teachers, culture-aware safety sets, example, litmus, and torsion-aware objectives that steer without flattening the scaffold. Epistemic audits, not only behavior checks. Pair refusals and rubric scores with nDNA dashboards so model curation pipelines optimize semantic longevity, the ability to stay adaptable across generations of fine-tuning, distillation, merging, or self-training. A unifying, simple diagnostic. You can summarize layer-wise vitality with one composite number. Epistemic vitality at a layer is equal to curvature times path length times belief field strength. Monitor its change across generations. If the slope turns negative and keeps falling, the model is losing bend, work, and steering diversity, the geometric signature of semantic collapse. Think of it as a resting heart rate for the latent manifold. Easy to track, hard to fake. Why the biology analogy matters. In neuroscience, early biomarkers flag cognitive aging before symptoms. In evolutionary biology, inbreeding flattens fitness landscapes, reducing adaptive complexity long before a population crashes. Our geometric picture mirrors these patterns. Recursive self-training or self-merging can erode internal differentiation and expressive diversity, producing a semantic monoculture. The cure is the same class of ideas biology uses: robustness, plasticity, and modularity, translated into model design and data practice. Toward neural genomics. The spectral, thermodynamic, and vectorial tracking of nDNA is more than a visualization tool. It is a governance primitive, a bill of health you can attach to checkpoints, gates that stop risky merge or synthetic-only loops, budgets that trigger refresh with held-out or human data, and culture-aware alignment that preserves inherited priors while adding safety. Ultimately, this reframes evaluation. We don't only ask models to perform, we ask them to endure, adapt, and evolve. nDNA gives us the instruments to measure that endurance, the levers to preserve it, and the language to audit it, so our systems stay capable, expressive, and trustworthy over time. Please read the book for more details.